Okay, so we could start now our sutta class. So I've been speaking about the topic is paths to liberation in early Buddhism. Okay, so we've been taking this from different angles, different presentations of the path. So first we took the Noble Eightfold Path, and then we had a sequence on the full sequential training, the monastic training leading to liberation that we find in numbers of suttas in the Nikayas. And now we are taking the 7 factors of enlightenment. So last week I gave the first talk on the 7 factors of enlightenment. And today we'll continue with examining some other texts on the 7 factors of enlightenment. So I'm going to share my screen now. And then we will go through these texts and draw out their important points. Okay, so I'm going to take first the text that's numbered here, number 3, and it's in the Samyutta Nikaya. It's chapter 46. It's sutta number 6. So in this sutta, the Buddha is in a conversation with a wanderer named Kundalya. And so after the initial discussion, this wanderer asks the Buddha, what things, when developed and cultivated, fulfill correct knowledge and liberation? And we'll see from what follows that this conversation is built upon the principle of conditionality or the principle of cause and effect. So this is actually the fundamental philosophical principle of the Buddha's teaching, the principle that all things that arise through causes or conditions. And in this case, that principle is going to be applied to the unfolding of the entire Buddhist path. So the different stages of the path arise in sequence, with one stage depending on the previous stage, and the previous stage giving rise to the following stage. Yeah, so the ultimate goal of the Buddha's path is, you could say, true knowledge, correct knowledge, and liberation. Yeah, so this combination of correct knowledge and liberation, we could say, represents nibbana as experienced in this present life. And so the Buddha, of course, is one who has attained this correct knowledge and liberation. And so too the Arahat disciples of the Buddha. And so now the Buddha says that he's attained correct knowledge and liberation. And then the wanderer Kundalya asks, what are the things that when developed and cultivated fulfill or bring correct knowledge and liberation? And these 2 words also are very important, the words developed and cultivated. Yeah, these 2 words, they show that Buddhism is you could say it's a path of practice in which we have to develop certain things, the causes, in order to obtain other things, the results. Yeah, it's a little bit these words, I think, developed and cultivated. Originally, I think that they were derived from agriculture. So the farmer wants to gain certain crops, and for that he has to plant the seeds and then take care of his field. And when he plants the seeds and cultivates the field, in time he'll get the crops that he wants for food and for the market. So this applies to our practice of the Buddha's teaching. if we want to obtain the results of the practice, we have to develop and cultivate the earlier stages that lead to those results. So here we could say that the fruits of the path are correct knowledge and liberation. And to obtain those fruits, we have to develop the causes, develop and cultivate the causes, which in this case are the 7 factors of enlightenment. Okay, but then the wanderer goes further and he asks what things, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment. Okay, and then the Buddha answers that it is the 4 satipatthānas, here the 4 establishments of mindfulness, also sometimes translated the 4 foundations of mindfulness. That fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment. Yeah, and this is quite understandable because the first of the 7 factors of enlightenment is mindfulness. Okay, so then the wanderer goes further. You could see he's asking with his questions, he's going to from the highest stage down to more basic stages of practice. And so he asks, what are the things to be developed and cultivated in order to fulfill the 4 satipatthānas, the 4 establishments of mindfulness? And then the Buddha answers, it's the 3 kinds of good conduct, which we'll see is good conduct of body, speech, and thought. And then the wanderer asks, what are the things that, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 3 kinds of good conduct? And then the Buddha answers that it is restraint of the sense faculties. Okay, before we go further, I could just put the sequence that's been developed here. We could put it in, you could see it in the form of a causal sequence. So we start with restraint of the sense faculties. That leads to good conduct of body, speech, and mind. And then based on this good conduct, one develops the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And then when the 4 foundations of mindfulness are developed, then they bring to fulfillment the 7 factors of enlightenment. And then the 7 factors of enlightenment, when they reach the high point of development, then they bring this clear knowledge and liberation. Okay, and then in what follows, the Buddha explains how these different stages are to be practiced. And he's explaining now in the case of a monastic person who has to, especially, who has to practice this restraint of the sense faculties. So in restraint of the sense faculties, when the monastic sees an agreeable form, hears an agreeable sound, and so on, he doesn't give rise to craving and lust for it. And then when he meets a disagreeable visible form, sound, and so on, he doesn't get disturbed by it and give rise to ill will or hatred. So this already implies developing a certain degree of equanimity towards sense objects. Okay, so then on the basis of this restraint of the sense faculties, one cultivates the 3 kinds of good conduct. So one abandons wrong conduct of the body, wrong conduct of speech, wrong conduct of mind, and one develops good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct, and good mental conduct. Then based on this good conduct, the three kinds of good conduct, one develops the four foundations of mindfulness. So this is contemplating the body, contemplating feelings, contemplating the states of mind, and contemplating, you just say dhammas. And remember that we have here the four foundations of mindfulness. And so mindfulness is the first of the seven factors of enlightenment. And so when one develops the four foundations of mindfulness, then one is developing the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. And then out of the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, the other enlightenment factors emerge, and they end with the enlightenment factor of equanimity. And so the text ends by saying that it is in this way that the seven factors of enlightenment are developed and cultivated so that they lead to the correct knowledge and liberation. Okay, now I will come back to sutta number 4 here, or text number 4 here later. I want to take first the sutta number 5 in our compilation. So this is a sutta, the title is Fire. Yeah, so here the Buddha brings up the question, so that he sort of starts the sutta with the questions. When the mind is sluggish, what are the factors of enlightenment that you should develop at that time? And when the mind is sluggish, what are the factors of enlightenment that one should not develop at that time? And what are the factors of enlightenment that you should develop at that time? And then at other times, when the mind is excited or stimulated, what are the factors of enlightenment that you should not cultivate? And what are the factors of enlightenment that you should cultivate at that time? Hmm. Yeah, so this is showing us, I think what's implied here are two of the five hindrances. So the third hindrance is called tina mida, which we translate as dullness and drowsiness. And the fourth hindrance is restlessness, actually sluggishness. Okay, so when the mind is overcome by dullness and drowsiness, then it becomes sluggish. And when the mind is overcome by restlessness and worry, then it becomes excited. So in order to overcome these obstacles to meditation, one has to know how to apply the the correct factors of enlightenment. And so this, we could say, is a way of getting the mind on the middle way. This is the way of equanimity, not dull and sluggish, and not restless and excited. Okay, so I think it's important or interesting to note that the Buddha begins with the sluggish mind, because when we start the practice, the mind tends to be sluggish. And so we have to arouse the mind. So he says when the mind is sluggish, at that time, or on that occasion, it's not the right time to develop the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the factor of concentration, and the factor of equanimity. And so the reason is that now the mind is sluggish. It's sort of a bit dull, um, maybe a bit lazy. And if you cultivate those factors, it's hard to get the mind moving, to get it aroused and energetic. So he compares this to a person who wants to cause a small fire to blaze up to become a big fire. And so if he throws into the fire, he throws wet grass, wet cow dung, wet sticks, and then sprays water over it or sprinkles it with soil, he won't be
Yeah.
able to make the fire blaze up.
Mhm.
If he does those things into the fire, he might even just put the fire out. So that shows that when the mind is sluggish or a little bit lazy, on that time you don't develop the enlightenment factors of tranquility, or you don't try to develop the enlightenment factors of tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And so when the mind is sluggish, on that occasion, it's the time to develop the enlightenment factors of investigation, the enlightenment factor of energy, and the enlightenment factor of joy. Because those are the factors that arouse the mind, that give it energy. But I have to, say something that seems a little bit different from the sutta. Like when we sit down for our daily meditation, we should try to develop mindfulness focused on the object. So we want to direct the mind towards concentration, towards samadhi. And the means for directing the mind to samadhi is mindfulness. When you sit down for your daily meditation, if you immediately start investigating or trying to develop joy, then the mind will not have the chance to settle into its object and to focus on the object. So in our day-to-day practice, we should make the effort to use mindfulness as a way of moving the mind towards samadhi, concentration or absorption on the object. But as we're doing this, sometimes the mind will get sluggish and drowsy, and then it's the time to apply these three factors of enlightenment. Okay, then we come back to the simile of the fire. So now the person wants to cause the small fire to blaze up. And so in that case, the appropriate action is to throw dry grass, dry cow dung, and dry sticks into the fire, and then either blow on the fire or use a fan to stimulate the fire. And in that way, you can cause the small fire to become a large fire. Okay, so these three factors, investigation, energy, and joy, are the factors that arouse the sluggish mind. Okay, then now we take the other side of the picture where we have the excited mind. The mind is restless or overstimulated, and we want to calm it down. Okay, so the Buddha says that on that occasion, this is when the mind is excited, it's not the right time to develop the enlightenment the enlightenment factors of investigation, of energy, and of joy, because these factors stimulate the mind, and now we're trying to calm it down. Okay, and again, we have a simile to illustrate this. In this case, we have the large fire, a bonfire, and the person wants to extinguish that bonfire. So if he throws more fuel into into the fire, he's not going to be able to extinguish the bonfire, but instead the bonfire will become even larger. Yeah, so that shows how on the occasion when the mind is excited, that's not the time to develop those stimulating enlightenment factors, but at that time, the appropriate factors to cultivate are the three calming factors. That is tranquility, concentration or samadhi, and the factor of equanimity or upekkha. Okay, so again, the Buddha continues with the simile of the fire. So now when you have the large bonfire and the man wants to extinguish it, then what he does is to throw wet grass, wet cow dung, and wet sticks on it, sprays it with water and sprinkles it with soil. But in actuality, it's probably not a good idea to throw wet grass, wet cow dung, and wet sticks on it, because the fire will cause the wetness to evaporate, and then it will continue to burn the grass, cow dung, and sticks as fuel. Yeah, so the way to extinguish the large bonfire would be to spray spray it with water or sprinkle it with soil or sand. And so on that occasion, when the mind is excited, that is the time to develop those three factors, the three calming factors of tranquility or calmness, samadhi or concentration, and equanimity. Yeah, so those are the factors that cause the mind to settle down and become more deeply concentrated or absorbed. But then the Buddha ends, he makes a very important statement. He says, mindfulness is useful everywhere. Yeah, so it's through mindfulness that you can recognize when the mind is dull and sluggish, and you can recognize when the mind is too excited. And mindfulness knows how to apply the appropriate remedies in order to stimulate the sluggish mind and to calm down the excited mind. Yeah, so mindfulness is what helps to establish balance between the two groups of the enlightenment factors. Yeah, so you can see we have these two groups of the enlightenment factors, the stimulating factors, the calming factors, and then mindfulness is the balancing factor. And also, it seems to me that I would say that equanimity is the state of balance that arises. Yeah, so through developing the enlightenment factors, one wants to reach the state of equanimity, and mindfulness is what helps to promote that equanimity. Okay, now I want to go back to the other sutta that I skipped over for the time being. Okay, so this is in the Samyutta Nikaya. Again, it's chapter 46, sutta number 2. So the sutta opens by saying that just as this body is sustained by nutriment, so too the five hindrances are sustained by nutriment. And here by the word nutriment, or in Pali, ahara, normally means food, but the Buddha also uses the word nutriment in an extended sense as a cause or condition, a supporting condition. And so the use of this word nutriment, again, it shows the principle of causality or conditionality. Yeah, in this sutta and elsewhere in other suttas, the Buddha establishes this contrast between the five hindrances as the obstacles and the seven factors of enlightenment. Yeah, here I'll be skipping over the section on the five hindrances and we'll be going directly to the section on the seven factors of enlightenment. Okay, so the Buddha, he begins with the same statement that the body is supported by nutriment, and similarly, these seven factors of enlightenment have their nutriment. So he begins by raising the question, what is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness and for the fulfillment of the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness? Yeah, you could say that there's a distinction here of two stages in the development of the enlightenment factors. In the first stage, we don't have the enlightenment factors, but we have to give rise to them. And in the second stage, we have to develop the enlightenment factors after they've arisen. Again, this is like the farmer cultivating his crops. First, the farmer has to plant the seeds. And then after planting the seeds, he has to look after his crops day after day, month after month, until he can get the harvest, the fruits. Okay, so the question then is, what is the, we could just put it generally, what is the nutriment for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness? And the answer given is that there are things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness and frequently giving careful attention to them. That's the important word, yoniso manasikara. So with this, we naturally, this gives rise to the question, what is meant by those things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness? So I would have to answer this myself, and I would say that these are the four foundations of mindfulness, the four objects of mindfulness. So that would be the body, feelings, the states of mind, and then the dhammas, or various mental factors. And then I would also say that the things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness are the other factors that have to be connected to mindfulness when practicing the four foundations of mindfulness. Yeah, so the sutta on the foundations of mindfulness mentions that when you practice the foundations of mindfulness, you also need energy and clear comprehension. Yeah, the commentary mentions a number of other factors that are useful for each of the factors of enlightenment. So it mentions among the things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is doing all activities with mindfulness and clear comprehension. So that is when we go about our everyday activities, we should always act with some degree of mindfulness and clear knowing, clear understanding of what we are doing. And the commentary also mentions that one should avoid associating with unmindful people, with careless people, and associate with mindful people. And then you should also have the right resolution. That is a mind that inclines towards establishing mindfulness. Yeah, so the way you could put this into practice, maybe at the beginning of each day, before you start your daily activities, even right after waking up, you make the determination, may I perform all my actions today with mindfulness and clear comprehension. Yeah, so even if you become forgetful during the course of the day, if you make that resolution in the morning, as day by day goes by, you'll become more mindful over time. Okay, then we come to the next factor of enlightenment. This is the factor of discrimination of states or dhammas. And so what is the nutriment for this enlightenment factor? The sutta says that there are wholesome and unwholesome states of mind, blamable and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states, and frequently giving careful attention to them. That is the nutriment or condition for the enlightenment factor of investigation. Yeah, so this suggests that the function of investigation is to distinguish the different states of mind that arise, particularly when we're sitting in meditation during the early stages of practice. Yeah, so you see that when you sit down for meditation and you try to apply the mind to a simple object like the breath, the mind starts to wander with different thoughts arising, different emotions. And so it's through this factor of investigation that you're able to distinguish what are the good factors that have arisen and what are the harmful or obstructive factors. And it is this factor of investigation that will eventually turn into wisdom, the wisdom of insight. You know, the commentary mentions a few other factors that contribute to strengthening the enlightenment factor of investigation. For example, it mentions asking questions about such things as the five aggregates, the different elements, the sense bases, the Four Noble Truths. And then it mentions reflecting on such topics as the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, the three marks of existence, and so on. And it mentions avoiding unwise people and associating with wise people. Yeah, so this shows, again, we always see so often in the Buddha's teaching, the emphasis on right association, associating with the right kind of people. And then the commentary also again mentions right resolution. That is the determination to develop wisdom. So even if we don't have a high degree of wisdom, but if we make that determination, that decision, I want to develop wisdom, that will become a strong motivation for developing wisdom. Okay, I want to leave some time for questions, so I might have to go a little quickly through some of the others. Okay, then we have the nutriment for the enlightenment factor of energy or effort, right effort. And so what is the nutriment for this? The Buddha mentions, he says, the element of arousal, the element of endeavor, and the element of exertion. Yeah, so these are three stages in the development of energy. So the element of arousal, that is the initial stage where you give rise to energy. The element of endeavor, this is the middle stage where you are sustaining energy. And then the element of exertion, this is the stage of powerful energy. Okay, then next we come to the enlightenment factor of joy. And so the text says that the nutriment for the enlightenment factor of joy are things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of joy. Yeah, so this doesn't seem very helpful in itself, but the commentary tells us that some of the things that contribute to giving rise to joy would be the recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Yeah, so if you think about the qualities, the good qualities of the Buddha, think about the wonderful nature of the Dhamma, think about the virtues of the Aryan Sangha, that helps to give rise to joy. And then the commentary also mentions that you should avoid rough people and associate with gentle people or joyful people and have the right resolution, the resolution to give rise to joy. Okay, then we have the nutriment for the enlightenment factor of tranquility. And the answer that the sutta gives is, it says that there's tranquility of body, tranquility of mind, and frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for this enlightenment factor of tranquility. So actually, in my experience, the method that conduces most to tranquility of both body and mind is to be mindful of the breathing, of in and out breathing. Because the breath is something, the factor that it's a bodily process, but it also conditions our mind. So when we get restless or agitated, and we simply then turn our attention to the breath, then the mind settles down and the body settles down. Okay, then we come to the nutriment for the enlightenment factor of concentration or samadhi. And then the answer given, the nutriment is the sign of serenity, the sign of non-dispersal. Well, actually, these two words are really just the same thing, but it means this is for developing samadhi or concentration, fixing the mind, focusing the mind upon your meditation object. Okay, so whatever meditation object you choose, then you give careful attention to that meditation object, trying to make it more and more prominent in your practice. Okay, then we come to the seventh enlightenment factor. So the nutriment for the enlightenment factor of equanimity, the text says things that there are things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of equanimity, and frequently giving careful attention to them. That is the nutriment for the enlightenment factor of equanimity. Yeah, so this definition or the statement in the sutta maybe doesn't seem to be very illuminating on its own. But what I would say in my own experience, what helps very much to develop equanimity is reflection on impermanence. Yeah, so this is not the deep insight into impermanence, but just reflection on the fact that everything is impermanent, everything changes. So if you meet with some happiness, some success, you reflect, this is impermanent, not stable, it will change. And in that way, you don't become attached to the happiness. And then when you meet with some disappointment, some cause of sorrow, then you reflect that this too is impermanent, this will change. And in that way, you don't get pulled down by your disappointment. And that will help to establish the state of equanimity. Okay, I think that will do for our presentation today. Now we could take a few questions.
I have one question for today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last time we considered a scheme in which the development of 7 factors of enlightenment occurs one after the other sequentially. Today, we see that the selective development of each of them, of the factors of enlightenment, is possible as well. So, following the paradigm of sequential development
Yeah.
as a factor enhancing the, for example, energy factor,
Yeah.
we should take the Dhamma investigation factor. And in addition, last time we said that starting with the joy factor, the enlightenment factors develop themselves further. So we actually do the mindfulness factor,
Yeah.
investigation factor, and joy factor, and other factors are developed by themselves. But here we see that they can still be developed by each of the seven. And is there any sort of contradiction here?
Okay. Okay. I don't think that they're contradictory. I wouldn't say that the seven enlightenment factors at a certain point, some of them develop on their own, but one always has to pay attention to them and see which need to be aroused and which need to be strengthened. And you could also see from the sutta on fire that there's a need to develop or give more attention to certain enlightenment factors depending on one's own condition of mind. And so sometimes the mind is more sluggish, then you apply certain factors. Sometimes the mind is excited, then you have to apply the calming factors. But there does seem to be a certain sequence. I mean, there is the enlightenment factors are laid out in a meaningful sequence because normally we have to start off by energizing the mind. And then when the mind gets energized, then we can work more on calming the mind.
So we have a question in a chat. Regarding discrimination of dhammas, could Bhante explain dark and bright states with their counterparts, perhaps with examples?
Okay, just as an example, I would say sort of the dark states, those that would be really equivalent to the unwholesome states. So those example of those would be the five hindrances. And then their counterparts or the bright states would be their counterparts. And those would, an example of those would be the seven factors of enlightenment. Or we could say that some dark states would be, let us say, doubt, um, laziness, lack of mindfulness, distraction, and dullness. And then the bright states will be their counterparts. This would be the five faculties of faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Okay, I see one question. Is it fair to say that mindfulness is the ability to step out of our bodies and perceive our perceiving? Yeah, today people are publishing whole books about the meaning of mindfulness. And so I'm rather hesitant to try to sum up mindfulness in just one statement. Okay, I think we're going to have to end for the day because I'll have to be going going up for the meal.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll end with the sharing of the merits. I'll recite the verses.
И сейчас мы будем произносить слова разделения заслуг.
Akasata chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantam nanumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang Dukha Pata Chani Dukha Baya Pata Chani Baya Soka Pata Chani Soka Antu Sabepi Panino. Okay, so we could end with 3 bows to the Buddha. Okay, 1, 2, 3. And thank you all for joining today. And thank you again to Oleg for translating.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Bante.
Thank you, Bhante.